Hello, students. We've been looking into the topic of, or rather, the chapter of the three orders, and we had seen yesterday that yes, how important the clergy was, but we also saw that with the growth of Christianity, it was not that the European civilization and the Mediterranean civilization completely debunked its ancient ways of doing things and their old gods. They also carried the great amount of traditions that they had inherited from the Greek civilization and the Roman civilization, and naturally for them these sites were also very important as places of pilgrimage. They considered these places to be holy, and of course, as Christianity was also growing around, major churches were being made in the areas, and particularly in the locations where their great saints had been buried. So naturally, those places became the center of pilgrimage and worship. So those things were becoming very important, because you have to understand, students, that a new faith had been born. Okay, it had been just about 500-600 years when a new faith called Christianity was born. So it was taking shape, it was evolving, and that is what we are studying here, because we saw the Benedictine monasteries, which came up just after 600 years before after the death of Christ, and how it spread rapidly in different parts of Europe. And by 11th century, definitely, church was one of the most important and powerful institutions in the medieval world at that point in time, particularly in Europe and the Mediterranean areas. So today we look into this topic of the third order peasants, free and unfree. You have to understand, students, that you cannot have any society without talking about their peasants. Though they are not considered to be important economically, but no society can ignore its peasants, because they happen to be the foundation of any civilization or any society. Though we kind of are short-sighted, and also very conveniently think that yes, because we are the industrialists and someone happens to be doctor and someone happens to be an engineer, so we are the ones who contribute more. And naturally, how much can a carpenter or a blacksmith, or for that matter an electrician, how much can he contribute? But we have no idea when it comes to the kind of enormous role that they play historically, not just in terms of economy, but also in terms of their social contributions. And you cannot talk about a society without talking about the peasants, though in terms of per capita income, they are not given much importance at all. So this is not just something which is unique to India and Indians. It has been historically the same story in any part of the world, for that matter. It is very, very human. uh, the third order peasants, free and unfree. Let us now turn to the vast majority of people, namely those who sustain the first two orders. That is, cultivators were of two kinds. Those two orders, that is, the whole nobility, that is the money of nobility, trying to show that they were rich, because of the enormous amount of wealth that they had. But where was that health wealth coming from? All that was coming from, now they might be having hundreds and hundreds of acres of land, but what good was that land if the noble, right, he just had probably 10 or 20 servants? So what can he do if he's not willing to work? And even if he works, what good is going to come out of the fact that if you have 100 acres of land and 5 people are working there? You need people to work on those lands. And I have repeatedly told you before in this while studying this chapter, that in those times, agriculture was the mainstay of any economy. 95% of the people used to be employed one way or the other in agriculture, and that was the biggest revenue earner in those times. So Free peasants held their farms as tenants of the Lord. The men had to render military service at least 40 days every year. So that essentially it means that even if you were a farmer, but a young man would be, working as a soldier at least 40 days every year. Peasant families had to set aside certain days of the week, usually three, but more often when they would go to the Lord's estate and work there. The output from such labor, called labor rent, would go directly to the Lord. In addition, they would be required to do other unpaid services like digging ditches, gathering firewood, building fences, and repairing roads and buildings. But you have to understand one thing, students. This was not just that would ultimately benefit only the Lord or the noble class, and it would also benefit them, the workers, where they would be living. If you have proper fencing, if you have been gathering firewood, students, you have to understand that these are very cold countries that we are talking about. So if you have firewood, it would surely come in handy at night. So they spun thread, wove cloth, made candles, and pressed grapes to prepare wine. So they used to also play, the children and the women also used to play a very important role. England, feudalism developed in England from the 11th century. The Angles and Saxons from Central Europe had settled in England in the 6th century. The country's name England is a variant of Angleland. In the 11th century, William the Duke of Normandy, if you remember in our previous video, we had discussed Normandy. I had told you about this coastal town from France, that is the William the Duke, who had crossed English Channel and attacked England and had become the ruler. So, Normandy was also very important during the Second World War when the Allied forces landed in Normandy, the beaches of Normandy, to fight against Hitler's German army. And William I had the land mapped and distributed it in sections to 180 Norman nobles who had migrated with him. Guys, this is something that you can also look into. Factors affecting social, this is important, factors affecting social and economic relations. While members of the first two orders saw the social system as stable and unchanging, there were several processes which were transforming the system. Some of these, such as changes in the environment, were gradual and almost imperceptible. Imperceptible would mean that it's so gradual that you could barely notice it, right? It would escape your notice, it would escape your attention. Others were more dramatic, like the changes in agricultural technology and land use. These, in turn, were shaped by and had an effect on the social and economic ties between lords and vassals. The environment. From the 5th to the 10th centuries, most of Europe was covered with vast forests. Okay? Uh, Thus, the land available for agriculture was limited. Also, peasants, dissatisfied with their conditions, would flee from oppression and take refuge in the forest. Europe was undergoing an intensely cold climate spell in this period. This led to severe and prolonged winters, a shortened growing season for crops, and reduced yields from agriculture. From the 11th century, Europe entered a warm phase. Average temperatures increased, which had a profound effect on agriculture. Students, you have to understand what it is essentially trying to tell you is, imagine a condition where you happen to be a farmer, right? Whether you work for the Lord, or whether you work for the nobility, whichever way you look at it. If you happen, or the church for that matter, if you are tilling the church lands, you have to understand that if you were working as a farmer, and if the conditions are extremely cold, then it is the chances of you having a good harvest was very, very remote. And so just imagine, you are paying taxes as well, and but at the same time you have to feed your family. So it is naturally going to be extremely difficult and harsh on you and your family if you have such weather conditions. We know that farming needs cooperation of the weather gods. Even today, even in 21st century, not just in India, in any part of the world for that matter, if irrespective of the great advancements of and in agricultural technology, right from you know great and smart and computerized tractors to all the great um, uh, 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 tube wells and water extraction machines and fertilizer and insecticide and everything and pesticide, you name it. But unless the weather gods are in a mood to cooperate, you would not be having good yield at all. Your crops would be suffering. Something or the other would go wrong. So imagine, even if in 21st century you need good weather for your crops, you can just imagine what must have been the condition in 10th 11th century at that point in time. And so the life is extremely harsh for the farmers, and that's what they used to do. Many farmers, they used to, in the darkness of night and in secretly, they would rush inside and they would run inside the jungles to live there, and they would never ever come back because they did not want to pay taxes. They did not want to live that kind of a harsh life which was waiting for them in those agricultural lands. They would rather live in isolation, being, and they would prefer living in the group of 10, 20, or 25 people where no one disturbs them, where the tax collectors do not enter and ask for them for paying any taxes, because they would be just managing from whatever barely, because whatever, now this time they had to just produce what they needed. They didn't have to do it for the church, the clergy class, or the nobility at all. They just had to grow whatever they wanted and what their family needed, and that's what it was. So this is what it is about. Thank you.